Hello, students. Today we're going to be organizing our thoughts in a dramatic fashion because this week's topic is all about organizing things. In fact, it is sometimes called the science of taxonomy, and no, it has nothing to do with money and paying taxes, but it has everything to do with arranging things in particular order. So let's get right to it today because we have a shortened topic this week. We're going to finish up our notes in one day, do some activities tomorrow, and have a quiz the following day. So we have a 3-day week this week, and we're going to make this a nice short topic. And the topic is classification. So, what exactly is classification? Well, before we get into the meat of the material of our notes, let me show you a picture and ask you to do something with this picture. I want you to look at this picture, and I'm going to move a little bit out of the way here. And I would like you to think about how you might arrange or group the items in this picture. Take a few moments now to think about it individually and discuss as a class. All right. Well, maybe you came up with arranging these things and grouping them according to their morphology. Morphology is a fancy name for how things look on the outside, their structure. Like maybe you put all of the starfish in one group. By the way, they're really not fish. They're more technically known as sea stars. Maybe you put all of the round organisms in a different group, and the snake or the worm-like creatures in another group. You know, there is no right way or wrong way that you could have classified or grouped these objects. In fact, your discussion among one another, you probably came up with some disagreements as to the reasoning or the justification for putting certain items in one group as opposed to another group. There is no right or wrong, but in science, in life science, there are agreed upon methodologies that scientists use to classify or to group different objects. But believe it or not, scientists can disagree as well, just like you. And so, at various times throughout history, we have to come up with different ways of organizing material, whether it's classifying organisms or classifying stars or planets. No matter what the object is that we're trying to organize, scientists make new discoveries, and these new discoveries lead to new discussions, and these new discussions lead to new disagreements, and these new disagreements can sometimes lead to discrepancies in the way in which things are arranged. And so at times, scientists have to get together and figure out how to move forward so that they're all thinking on the same page. So let's get into our notes with the word taxonomy. Taxonomy itself, as I said earlier, has nothing to do with money, has nothing to do with paying taxes. Taxonomy is all about the science of classification or grouping things. And we can group many different kinds of things. Scientists love to group things into different categories because once we can group things, we can organize information and make it easier to study. Because once you have things organized in different groups or classifications, then you can give, let's say, one scientist this group, one scientist that group, and you can learn more about a particular group because you have classified them. So, in life science, we can classify or group living things as either plants or mammals, insects, birds. We're going to be learning about a couple different ways in which scientists have classified organisms on planet Earth. But as I said, any objects can be classified. If you are a doctor, for instance, maybe a gastroenterologist, you might want to classify certain things that come out of the human body so that you can carry on an intelligent discussion with your patient about what might be ailing them. And if you're talking to a kid, they might not be able to understand some technical lingo, but even a kid can probably understand the difference between rabbit droppings, a bunch of grapes, corn on the cob, sausage, chicken nuggets, porridge, and gravy. Most kids know the difference between those common items. So if you were a gastroenterologist and you had a patient who was a young child and you were asking about their bowel movements, you might use a common frame of reference because a medical professional like a gastroenterologist needs to know how to classify even your poo in order to help you. So don't dwell upon this particular slide too long. I wouldn't encourage you to make it your screensaver. So let's move on to the next item. Something a little bit more scientific here. Aristotle. Aristotle, as you may recall from the beginning of the year, was like an incredibly talented ancient Greek philosopher known as the father of modern science. I mean, this dude was brilliant despite his stoic appearance. He had quite a personality. Now, Aristotle is credited with being the first one to really develop a type of grouping system for living things. Not surprising if you know anything about Aristotle. But here's the deal. In Aristotle's day, and we're talking thousands of years ago, most people, when they looked around in the environment, saw living things in only two forms. Aristotle was no different, but he officially categorized living things as either plants or animals. Now, if you think about this from Aristotle's perspective, this makes complete sense. I mean, after all, when you look around, you either see living things crawling, moving, jumping, swimming, or flying around, or you see living things growing out of the ground. In either case, you could very logically divide all living things into these groups that Aristotle identified as either plants or animals. Now, today, however, we know a little bit more than Aristotle did. For instance, he didn't really understand the scientific principles of photosynthesis, as an example. And so when he saw things growing out of the ground like mushrooms, he did not truly realize that mushrooms are not photosynthetic like other plants are. In fact, mushrooms, as we'll discover in upcoming topics, is heterotrophic. They can't make their own food. And so they're not plants at all. But they're certainly not animals. So what kind of category would you put them into? Well, a different category. Aristotle did not benefit from having certain technology at his disposal, like microscopes. So Aristotle couldn't see the whole world of microscopic living things like Van Leeuwenhoek did with his improvements of the microscope. And so he didn't have that benefit. So, to Aristotle's defense, his classification of living things as either plants or animals, completely logical and completely acceptable thousands of years ago. But times have changed, and we have greater technology and greater understanding of things. In fact, today, we currently have, even though there are debates going on with scientists right now about whether we should have 6 or 7 different groupings of living things. But in class this year, we're going to discuss 5 different categories or groups of living things. And so let's take a moment and go over these 5 different groups that we will call kingdoms of organisms. We'll start with the most obvious and work down to those that are a little bit more obscure. So, in the field of taxonomy, we have today, most scientists agree, we have a 5 kingdom system. Now, the word kingdom, incidentally, is the name of a group, the largest group. And we'll talk about that in a little while. So, our first kingdom of organisms are called kingdom Animalia. And it is a Latin usage of the term there, or a Latin form. So it ends with IA. It sounds kind of cool and scientific. Animalia. Kingdom Animalia is probably the first kingdom that you think of if I were to ask you to list some living things. Many of you would probably list animals, like a dog. And I'm sorry, isn't that dog cute? Oh, you're so cute, puppy dog. But a dog is an example of an animal. By the way, so are we. And we'll be learning that there are many different subgroups of each of these kingdoms as well. But the first kingdom, kingdom Animalia. Kingdom number 2 are the plants in kingdom Plantae. Now, at this time, we're in full agreement with Aristotle and his 2 different groups of living things, the animals and the plants. Kingdom Plantae can include a whole variety of plants, as we will discover in greater detail. But an example of a plant would be a rose, because a rose, by any other name, is just as sweet. Now, here's where we start to diverge from Aristotle, because again, we know a little bit more than he was aware of. So we don't stop with only 2 kingdoms of organism. I mentioned that mushroom to you earlier. Well, the mushroom is put into a 3rd kingdom of organisms called kingdom fungi. And many people think that these organisms are a lot of fun to hang out with because they do include the fungi. But all right, and including in addition to mushrooms in kingdom fungi, we have yeast, which we have experienced before this year, and we also have my personal favorite, athlete's foot or foot fungus or toe cheese. And don't you want to just look at this picture and go, Hopefully you really don't want to do that, because that would be absolutely disgusting. But athlete's foot, believe it or not, is a form of a fungus. It's not a plant or an animal, it's a fungus. So if you want to avoid growing toe cheese on your feet, make sure that when you're done showering or bathing, you dry your feet completely. And if you're showering in a public place like a gym or a locker room, wear shower shoes, because athlete's foot is very contagious. It only takes one person to drop some of these spores into the water and the floor, and you too can have feet that look like that. By the way, this is not my foot, okay? All right, let's move on to the 4th kingdom, called Kingdom Monera. Kingdom Monera are made up of organisms called the monerans. An example of monerans include bacteria. There are lots of bacteria of various types. In the future, we'll be spending a week learning about bacteria and actually do a lab sampling some bacteria from around this building. But those are just cartoon images of bacteria. When we grow bacteria in petri dishes, colonies of them will actually look more like this. These are literally millions of individual bacteria living in these colonies within this agar in a petri dish. And again, we'll learn about those later on. But there's one final kingdom of organisms, and that is the fifth kingdom called Kingdom Protista. Kingdom Protista includes such little tiny microscopic critters as diatoms. We'll be learning all about diatoms too. And in fact, they're really cool. If you have a cat or a dog at home and you have a water bowl or dish that you use, if you do not clean out that dish or bowl regularly, you might begin to notice a brown film or an orange film accumulating on the bowl. If you haven't cleaned yours at home in a while, empty it out today. Take a paper towel or a tissue and wipe the bowl and look at that white tissue or paper towel. If it's colored at all, like a brown or an orange, you're growing diatoms and your poor pet is ingesting them. So clean out your pet's bowl once in a while, will you please? They'll appreciate it and they'll be healthier for it as well. Now, speaking of ingesting protists, here's a critter that you do not want to ingest. This is an example of a protist called Giardia. And Giardia is a one-celled critter that if you do ingest it, he will wreak havoc with your digestive system and you'll be having that gravy for a long time, and you'll be seeing a gastroenterologist to give you medicine to kill these little buggers so that you can go from gravy to porridge and get back to that good old corn on the cob again. But we'll learn about this Giardia as well in the future when we get to the topic on protists. So, as you can see, Aristotle was limited with his two-kingdom system. We now have a five-kingdom system of organisms, but we don't end there because I want to share with you the contribution to science that Linnaeus made. Carolus Linnaeus made a huge contribution to science. And he came much later than Aristotle. Linnaeus from the 18th century, and he developed a system of naming things. In fact, Linnaeus developed a naming system called binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature. You may have heard reference to this binomial nomenclature before, but we're going to unpack it and learn about it in a little bit more detail here today. First, look at the word binomial. Any idea what the prefix bi means? Means two. Think of a bicycle, biplane, bicycle, bicycle. I want to ride my bicycle. I want to ride my bike. All right, binomial literally means a two name. Nomial comes from the same Greek root word that we get the word name from, which is also similar to nomenclature. Nomenclature is a word that means naming system. So binomial nomenclature literally is a two-word naming system. A two-word naming system. You have probably heard of human beings being referred to as Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens is an example of binomial nomenclature. And the two parts of the naming system include the genus and the species. And the genus and the species are always written in Latin. But the genus and species is kind of like an organism's first name and last name. Like my name is Henry Skirpst, my first name and my last name. You have a first name and a last name too. My baloney has a first name. It's B-O-L-G. No, wait, it's M-A-Y-E-R. My baloney has a second name. It's M-A-Y-E-R. And if you ask me every day, I don't remember the rest of that song. But Oscar Mayer has a way with B-O-L-O-G-N-A. Anyway, genus and species. Genus is the first name, species is the second name. But I want you to pay particular attention to how I wrote these words. They are italicized always. Genus and species are always italicized, meaning slanted letters, because it's a foreign language. And when you write foreign languages in this context, they're always italicized. Also, pay attention to the fact that the word genus, the first letter is capitalized, and in species, the first letter is lowercase. So genus, species in Latin are the binomial nomenclature. Here's an example of a lion. The scientific name for lion is Panthera leo. Panthera leo. Leo is Latin for lion. Panthera is Latin for cat-like animal. Notice the P is capitalized, the letter L is not. Now, as we continue with the taxonomic classification system, there is a certain ordering that we must follow. I just gave you the genus and species there a moment ago. There are larger categories than just the genus and species. In fact, I gave you the largest category a few moments ago when we talked about the 5 kingdoms of organisms. So the first taxonomic classification system is called the kingdom. The kingdom is the largest category. Currently, most scientists are in agreement that we have 5 kingdoms of organisms, and within those organisms, they can be broken down into subcategories that we call phyla, the singular of which is phylum. So one phylum, several phyla with an A at the end. But kingdom, phylum, a phylum can be further divided into a class, which can be divided further into an order, into a family, and then finally into a genus and a species. The species, as you can see here, is the most specific of all of the categories. Now, some of you might be a little bit more versed in taxonomic classification than others, and some of you might say, well, what about breeds? What about various other groupings? Well, they are subspecies. We're not going to get into that right now. We're just going to stick with the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And I want you to keep in mind once again that it goes from the largest group to the smallest group. As you go from top to bottom, it increases, organisms increase in similarity, but they decrease in numbers. As you go from bottom to the top, organisms decrease in similarity, but increase in numbers. Here's a pictorial representation of the taxonomic classification system. You can see here that there are a lot of different animals that exist, from grizzly bears to sea stars. But once you start getting into the phylum, like phylum Chordata is made up of only animals that have a backbone. Well, sea stars don't have a backbone, so they don't belong in phylum Chordata. They belong in a different phylum. Also, Also, not all chordates are mammals. Snakes are not mammals, so they don't belong with other mammals. But the grizzly bear, all the way down to the cute little squirrel, they're all mammals, so they're all members of class Mammalia. Order Carnivore. Carnivore, you know what a carnivore is? It's a meat eater. Well, squirrels also eat nuts and berries. They're not just meat eaters like these other animals are. So, squirrels, they don't belong in order Carnivora. But guess what? Foxes aren't like these other three that are more bear like critters, which leads us to the family Ursidae and the genus Ursa. By the way, Ursa is Latin for bear. Like the Big Dipper, the real name of the Big Dipper is Ursa Major, the big bear, the constellation. Which finally brings us down to the species, the most specific of categories. And we could say that the polar bear's scientific name, the genus and species, notice capitalization and also notice italics here, is Ursus arctos. Why? Because, well, polar bears live in the Arctic region, and Ursa because they are bears. So hopefully you get the idea of how this taxonomic classification system works. Again, we'll use the lion as an example here. This is driving me nuts. Let me just add a little space. That's better. Okay. Wait, too many spaces. Let me backspace here a little bit. So here again is an example of the scientific name, the full scientific name of a lion. Animalia cordata, Mammalia carnivora, Felidae, Panthera leo. That is a mouthful. Imagine having that written on your driver's license as your full legal name. Well, that is the full legal scientific name of the lion. So no matter where you are in the world, no matter where you might be, if you know another scientist, you can refer to Panthera leo. In fact, you could go to a zoo in a different country in the world. And if you're looking for the lion but don't know how to say lion in that language, just say Panthera leo, Panthera leo. And they will point you to the lion because that's going to be what's written on the sign in French, in German, in Chinese, in Portuguese, doesn't matter what language. Panthera leo is the name of the lion across the globe. Okay, so we're just about finished with our notes here. I want to give you a memory aid to help you memorize the correct order of the taxonomic classification system. And here it is in picture form. I wonder if you can guess what this is a picture of. I want you to pause for a moment and discuss what you see in this picture. Perhaps you see kings playing cards on fat green stools. And by the way, that last word is making no reference to the gastroenterologist from earlier in this lesson. But if you look at it, kings play cards on fat green stools. I can see that picture and I can remember that silly little phrase pretty easily myself. And if I remember the first letter of each of those words, then it becomes easier for me to remember kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. I hope this little memory aid helps you out. I know it helps me out, but you could come up with your own as well. So dwell upon that, chew upon that overnight, and tomorrow I'm going to be talking a little bit about the lab activity before we get into it, and you're also going to have some time to do some activities in class as well, because the following day with a shortened week, will be your quiz day, the last day of this week. So I hope you enjoyed that what's the word I'm looking for? That quick tour through classification and taxonomy. And for now, I'm going to say bye bye.